Back at home, Sandy was waiting for me with dinner ready. God, I loved her. She was what I can only describe as a perfect woman. The only way I can accurately articulate her meaning in words is nothing short of magical. It's like when we're together, time stops and this nostalgic energy surrounds us, making life feel as if man and woman never left the Garden of Eden to begin with. No, I don't want to sound corny, but it's kind of like this mayonnaise commercial I was watching the other day. You know, that one with the family having a picnic, spreading mayonnaise on some sandwiches, and the kids are running around playing with each other as the mom and dad are feeding bite-sized pieces of the sandwich to each other. Everybody's just smiling, having some good old wholesome fun. That's how every second being around Sandy feels. As we're eating, she mentions the dog. Even though I lied to her on the phone, I'm unable to now while I sit in front of her, and besides, I know she's an understanding spirit that won't hold the fact that I delayed the truth about what happened to Fluffy against me. So as they say, the truth will set you free. I explain how I found Fluffy dead from an overdose of embalming fluid, and she tells me she figured it was something along those lines, that someone has been calling the house phone, leaving death threats. She tells me she didn't want to tell me because she didn't want to upset me, so it looks like we're both at fault for not coming clean earlier. I further explained about the necrophiliac mortician and how it led me to the motorcycle clubhouse. Then I slapped her Chris Waddle $100 bills onto the table and explained how the motorcycle enthusiast donated it to me to make up for Fluffy. She just smiles and tells me I'm her hero. You see, it's different with Sandy. Not to sound sexist or anything like that, but most women don't want to hear about their significant other's bullshit. That's right, I said it. In fact, that's the cold truth about being a man. No one gives a shit about our feelings. You've been running around with the dead dog in the trunk of your car chasing necrophiliacs and sociopathic bikers by the name of roadkill. So what? Man up. Most women, when they're in conversation, want to vent. Mostly about things like what goes on at their work, like Susie brought in a gerbil today and how George never refills the copy machine after the paper runs out. But with Sandy is different. She cares about my bullshit. Next thing I know, Sandy and I started ripping each other's clothes off and going at it like a pair of jackrabbits in heat. With every thrust of our bodies against each other's with my dipping stick inside of her jar of jelly jam, a release of vibrational frequencies into the universe commences. Then Sandy gets on top of me and begins to bounce up and down on my mystical cosmic jam beater like a pogo stick. As Sandy and I are enjoying each other's carnal desires, I can't help but think of when I first lost my virginity after that fight with Joey Marconi. I remember this girl Katie coming up to me in the school hallway by my locker after my talk with Miss Appletree and smacking my lips with her cherry-flavored smackers, and a bunch of girls surrounding us singing Katie and Charlie sitting in a tree, Kissing. First come love, then comes marriage, then comes a baby in a baby carriage. Of course, after the kissing came the love, but marriage and a baby sure didn't follow. Actually, the only thing that followed was me finding Katie a few days later in the boys' bathroom getting pounded out by this kid Tommy, who was a quarterback on our school's football team, a grade ahead of ours. That was it. Katie had ruined me for so many years to come after watching that act of betrayal, and probably was the reason for me to develop a mistrust for the opposite sex, causing me to view women as nothing more than superficial and vain fuckboxes. But now Sandy had saved me out of the abyss of being a misogynist. That's right. She had saved me out of the clutches of my own hell and extinguished those flames of ignorance that once surrounded me. In fact, she was the only real savior I had ever come to know in life, and that is why I worshipped her with every ounce of my being. On a compound somewhere in a rural part of the town where Charles lived, hailed a group of radicals that, although would be considered terrorists in the eyes of the law, thought themselves to be messianic as far as their twisted ideologies were concerned. In the midst of the crowd of loyal and devout followers, two men who recently escaped from a maximum security prison stood as heroes to this newfound movement they had created. They were the two heads to the dragon, which could have had two more heads, but during their escape from the prison, they left behind the two politicians who formerly conspired with them because they felt these two were already so openly exposed as crooks. They didn't want to stain the primordial cloth of their movement, and besides, they knew followers of this sort were usually against the establishment, so it would make absolutely no sense to bring in the ones they claimed to be draining from the swamp. As a result of this neglect, those two politicians would remain incarcerated indefinitely for the remainder of the years they walked on the earth, mainly because their appeals would never hold up in state or federal appellate courts, and no president or governor would ever be bold enough to pardon former patriots who now are nothing more than convicted sex offenders and indirectly and directly responsible for numerous kidnappings and murders, which now were only recognized by the country. They formerly served as inmate number 601254 and inmate number 601255. As the rally began, the former five-star general and the famous evangelist took turns explaining how the crooked government had convicted them for crimes they had not committed and were in fact caught up in a global conspiracy that before they had the chance to expose the powers that be in an attempt to cover up the would have been exposure had yours truly charged and convicted for fear of what they knew. As they spoke, they used a plethora of big, intellectual words and complex theories that sounded good to the average and lesser simple-minded sheep in the crowd, but was in fact just a pretense to manipulate their sheepish minds, which lacked the intellectual abilities shared by these two con men, who were actually part of the reason why this country and the world was so screwed up in the first place. Their speeches continued in this format for the duration of the time they talked until the inevitable climax that looked like a scene from some international terrorist group in a third world country, with the followers holding up their assault rifles chanting, "Death to Thompson, death to Thompson, death to Thompson." So the scene now changes. Sandy and I are awakened to what sounds like someone yelling at us from a blowhorn and telling us to come out and surrender. In our disgruntled state, we waste no time grabbing a pair of gold-plated 40 caliber Desert Eagles with pearl handles out of the bedroom closet. I'd actually stolen the guns out of the federal locker after they had been repossessed from this Mexican drug lord that was caught on the side of the border after leaving a certain meeting with some of the members of this extremely wealthy cabal. It's kind of funny because as much of a machismo badass as he portrayed to be, when he was faced with spending the rest of his life in a 4x9 cell in a federal supermax prison underground in Colorado, he didn't hesitate to drop the dime on these affiliates, giving us their whereabouts and even the location of some of their bases of operations. This, of course, in exchange for life under the Witness Protection Program, where he would still be able to run his rackets as long as he kept feeding us intel on the rival cartels, which was a win-win scenario for him. Now, if you're wondering who these affiliates were, they were none other than Caesar Sin and Company, stating the Pinche Sickos were eating human organs. He even gave us the drop on the whereabouts of that warehouse harboring all those ensnared children and pickled adrenal glands, stating, "No bueno, too young, man, too young." Then he shook his head after performing the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit routine, feeling compelled to show compassion on those poor children in the eyes of his Creator. It's kind of incongruous, isn't it? The fact that he's responsible for the deaths of thousands upon thousands of innocent people, including children, but now he feels more righteous than his former associates. Because why? He has some moral conscience now that he's under our jurisdiction. Man, this guy is nothing more than a first-grade psychopath who has no more feeling for his fellow human than that of a wild rodeo bull does towards the cowboy riding him. The truth was, he was just playing the part of his newly acquired role of now being an informant for the federal government, which I'll have to admit was smart. It was part of the way he would evolve into the position of reinventing himself and help him to win favor in the eyes of the federal agents that were going to protect him. But the cold truth was, he was, is, and will be what he has always been, a sociopathic expert in the field of manipulation. I looked out of the living room windows and seen the house was surrounded by a bunch of men carrying heavy artillery. Some were even carrying large crosses. Then I seen the famous evangelist with a blowhorn in one hand, yelling something about an abomination and holding the Holy Bible in the other hand. The general was also yelling into a blowhorn, telling us either I come out or they come in. In the midst of this lunch mob's protest from my head, I looked at Sandy standing there in her bra and underwear, holding the massive gun in her small manicured hands and her hair all tangled up like we just got done fornicating. And I looked down after noticing some movement down below as I'm standing there in just my boxer briefs and realize I'm fully erect. Sandy as well notices the pinched tent and smiles. "I love you, baby. I love you too." This may very well be the last moments that I'll ever share with this beautiful creature in front of me, so naturally I hugged and kissed her. As I'm about to open the front door and more than likely meet my demise in a blaze of glory, I tell Sandy that she was the best thing that ever happened to me. Then she pleaded for me not to go out there, but before I had the chance to open the door, an array of gunshots sounded off. The fires momentarily return and what sounds like motorcycle engines becomes evident. I look out of the window and see the Saints assholes in a standoff with the militia radicals. Then I see Chomper leap at the former general and latch onto his privates. As he screamed, swaying back and forth in an attempt to release Chomper's grip on him, I saw some of the bikers mount one of the giant crosses upside down and, to my surprise, impale the famous evangelist asshole first onto it. As the evangelist had his anus stretched all the way to the point of death onto the object of which he represented, I decided this was the perfect opportunity to strike, but before I had the chance to open the door, Sandy grabbed me and told me she was coming with. By now, my erect member was raging so hard with so much blood flowing through it, I didn't think there was any left in my brain to be able to boost the neurons enough to make an educated argument as to why she should stay in the house. That's when she grabbed the door handle and opened the door in front of us. Side by side, we exited the house and unloaded our clips at our adversaries, like we were Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow. Mine to the former 5-star general struggling with Chomper latched onto his balls, and Sandy into some of the militiamen that were fighting with the bikers. In approximately 40 seconds, the militia was defeated, lying there like the end of some gory battle from history, and I found myself standing next to Sandy, fully erect, with the unloaded Desert Eagle at my side. In the grass next to the sidewalk, I picked up a small card. After noticing it with some kind of ancient script written on it, an image of a snake wrapped around an apple tree branch. As I looked up from reading the card, the president of the Saints Assholes came walking up to me with a big smile on his face. "Wow, you sure are happy to see me." See, now it changes. We had won the battle. The former 5-star general, who was responsible for orchestrating most of the catastrophes in the Middle East, was dead after being filled with a clip full of 40 caliber bullets and having his manhood ripped into shreds like it had just been processed at some meat factory. His confidant, the famous evangelist, was dead as well after having his rectum torn open by an inverted crucifix to being skewered onto the object he represented like the main course at a pig roast. These men shared the same fate as evil men in history once did, but the lessons rendered here today would surely be neglected, and in time more tyrants would fill the shoes of the ones that came before them. Now, of course, none of this could have been accomplished without the help of the Saints assholes. Unbeknownst to me at the time, the biker club had been tracking the militia once they got wind of the presence on the territory they call home, so thanks to that rugged bunch of motorcycle enthusiasts, Sandy and I would live to see another day. And before the media had got the chance to broadcast the incident, different agencies, including the military, cleaned up the scene and made the witnessing neighbors sign a contract, stating that if they ever spoke of this incident, they would be charged with treason. After dealing with the neighbors, they didn't bother with having the bikers sign the same contract because they knew, as far as the general public was concerned, the bikers lacked any real credibility. As I parked my car and walked into the maximum security prison that once housed the late general and evangelist, I looked at the card that was left on my front yard in anticipation. One of the members of the cabal of cannibals and sexual degenerates was left behind after the escape, and I wanted to know why. I knew this man had resources to the extent that it was like the devil himself had brought him up to the highest mountaintops and gave him the keys to the world in exchange for him to bow down and worship. And if anybody knew the meaning of this card, it was him. His name was Henry Hermberger, and he was one of the richest men on the side of the Atlantic Ocean. Henry was the offspring of a banking family that had rose to prominence during the turn of the century from the expansion of the railroads, but the same family was also believed to have had their hands in a number of different rackets during those days, one being taking advantage of the fact that alcohol had been outlawed for a period of time back then, so they accumulated another fortune by investing in the booming bootlegging industry. Henry himself had been groomed his whole life to become the head of this illustrious powerhouse, and when he finally rose to that prestigious position, some said they could even start to see horns growing from his forehead. Now, even though Henry was housed in this prison that was a melting pot for every type of psychological disorder known to man, he didn't have to worry about interacting with the common sociopath, pathological liar, or narcissistic rapist that he would have had he not have bought the prison itself and was housed on a completely new addition to the prison that was an add-on since Henry's purchase. As I enter the prison, I'm led through some huge acacia wood doors down a long red carpeted hallway with the heads of taxidermied animals hanging from both sides of the hallway. As I entered through another set of acacia doors, I found myself in the office of Mr. Hermberger. He was sitting behind a presidential-style looking desk, drinking a glass of scotch and smoking what smelled and looked like a Cuban cigar. "Agent Thompson, what brings you into my office today?" I looked around and noticed the room itself was full of priceless art from the Renaissance era, consisting of once political paintings to sculptures of Greek and Roman gods. After this quick observation of the room, I slapped the card onto his table. He picks it up and quickly inspects it. What is it? The billionaire banker chuckles a little. I thought it was a myth. Well, I never met the man myself, but you see the impression of the snake wrapped around the apple tree branch? I nod my head. That's the stamp of his signature ring. And the writing is from a language that has died out. Now, I'm not a linguist or anything, but I believe it's an address. I've seen the writing before, and I'm pretty sure that's what it is. You're sure? Yes. So who is he? I glanced around the room, beginning now understand why Henry didn't escape with his former associates. By the look of things, it's quite evident he's living just fine, whether he's in prison or not. The banker makes a sigh. Some say he's the devil, but I don't believe in fairy tales. Regardless, I must warn you that this man might not be what you expect. He began to laugh as he repeatedly bumped the tips of his index fingers against each other and then rubbing the tips around each other in a circular motion. If the myth is true, you shall see. Scene changes again. The only linguist I had known was an old priest by the name of Father O'Connor, so I paid him a visit. I hadn't seen him since my grandmother's funeral, but I knew he was still around, living in the convent he helped run at St. Sebastian's. As I walked into the church and was directed into an office by one of the nuns, I found Father O'Connor sitting comfortably reading from the pages of some religious philosopher that was martyred back when it was still considered heresy to openly speak out about the oppression the church was administering into humanity. As he noticed me walk into the room, he put down the analytical thoughts of the archaic heretic, stood up, and greeted me with an enthusiastic handshake. Charles, what a pleasant surprise. I haven't seen you since my grandmother's funeral. Ah, that's right. God bless her soul. She was a great woman. She will forever live in our hearts. That reminds me, I'm sorry about Dr. Winston. I know how close you guys were. We definitely shared our difference of opinion. Nevertheless, he was a brilliant man. Thank you, Father, for what it's worth. He always said, if there ever was a voice in religion worth listening to, it was yours. Now, as to the reason I've come, I need your expertise on something. As I finish saying this, I hand him the card. Then he inspects it for a brief moment. Where did you get this, Charles? Let's just say I stumbled upon it. It's a business card. The stamp with the snake intertwined around the apple tree branch is a Luciferian sign. The writing is Akkadian. It's been ages since I've actually read any of it, but this is an address. It's in Switzerland, 1313 Enlighten Road. What is all this about, Charles? I'm not really sure, Father, but I was told the man that represents this card is considered by some as the devil himself. Well, if there ever was a man who they consider to be the devil, it makes sense that he would live in Switzerland. Why is that, Father? Because they pretty much control the world's economy by its international banking system. Remember, you can either serve God or you can serve Mammon, but not both, because you will either love one or hate the other. Father, what can you tell me about the devil? Well, he's the father of all lies. He's the great deceiver. But if you want to get technical, there's a little bit of him in us all. The mystics say he's just a code for our egocentricity, and actually the Masons believe him to be the obfuscated righteous God and Jehovah to be the evil God. This reminds me of a vision I had many years ago on a fast I was partaking in. The vision itself was very strange, as I remember. There was a naked demon with horns chasing me through a long hallway, but as much as I tried to run away from it, it was still right behind me, running towards me with its privates swaying back and forth. For some reason, there were also a bunch of dolphins swimming up the streams of rainbows all around me. Then a man with hair as white as snow and eyes that looked like the flames of fire appeared and pulled out a spear from his side and handed it to me. Then, as he handed me the spear, he said something like, "Ouch." That's it, pretty much, except for after that, all around I could see was a bunch of blood spattered everywhere. Then I became interested in the spirit of destiny. The spirit of destiny? The one that stabbed Jesus in his side by the Roman soldier as he hung on the cross. It's said to have magical powers to the extent that whoever is in possession of it will rule over the entire earth. Supposedly, during Hitler's short reign, he was in possession of it. Anyways, I came across a fractured piece of the actual spear when I was visiting the Vatican many years ago. As I gazed upon it in the halls of the Holy Mother Church, I knew it was meant for me to possess its magic, so naturally I confiscated it. Father, you stole from the Vatican? I look at it more like it was destiny. Father O'Connor walks over to a little wooden box and opens it. Inside, upholstered in red velvet, lays a piece of broken metal. He grabs it out of the box and hands it to me. Take this. I know when the time comes you will know what to do. Thank you, Father. You're welcome, my son. So the scene changes again. Supposedly, so the scene changes. The house was surrounded by a forest in the Alps. Actually, house is a diluted description. Palace would be a more accurate word. The place looked like a castle out of the 16th century. When I rang the doorbell, I was expecting some Shakespearean character to open the door. Instead, a middle-aged man with short, gray, frosted hair, wearing some pretty flamboyant attire, a bright red Italian design suit with white stripes, accompanied by a pink and white silk scarf and some pink and white dress shoes, stood in front of me. When he introduced himself, I noticed he had this kind of British Sean Connery accent. Come in, laddie, and make yourself at home. My name is Lucifer. As he introduced himself, I noticed a signet ring on his hand. After introducing myself and showing him the card, he began giving me the tour of his immaculate estate. It was weird because he didn't even question as to where I had got the card from. His expression just lit up and I could tell he was becoming excited. Would you like a drink and a piece of sucking candy, laddie? At this beautiful, elegant Victorian-style table in front of us was a jar of rainbow swirled candies and a bottle of some really expensive-looking cognac and 2 glasses. You have to dip it in and let it soak, laddie, before you put it in your mouth. Without thoroughly thinking it through, I did as Romans and dipped the candy into the cognac and put it into my mouth. Then I quickly chewed it up and swallowed it down with the cognac. I had a habit of never really being able to just suck on candy without chewing it up out of impatience. As I did this, Mr. Fur became overjoyed. Splendid, laddie, splendid. As we continued to walk through the museum of obscure artwork, mostly depicting painted scenes of muscular nude men eating apples and sculptures depicting the same type of images, we stopped at one famous piece of art from the Renaissance. Michelangelo's picture depicting phoenixes locked together, spiraling out of control to their deaths, representing his love for a younger man. I just stood there kind of at a loss of words as I gazed at the picture in front of us, thinking to myself how super gay this place is, and now understanding why Herrenberger told me that the man behind the card might not be what I thought he would be. Now it had made sense as to why he made the derogatory gesture with his index fingers. Then it hit me, and I began to feel drowsy. Mr. Fur began to laugh. Didn't your mother ever tell you not to take candy from strangers, laddie? Then before I knew I was out. I awoke some time later on her bed in what I assumed was one of the guest bedrooms. Next to me, Mr. Fur sat on a chair with a glass of cognac in one hand and the broken piece of metal that I got from Father O'Connor in the other. As I sat up, I noticed I was now wearing some silk pajamas with little dolphins riding up rainbows embroidered on them. Then I noticed a strange sensation coming from my rectum. It was now clear as day I had been violated when I was out cold. So, laddie, what were you planning on doing with this piece of fractured metal? He just sat there and rubbed his finger against some of the edges, eventually pricking the tip of his index finger. Ouch! As I came to, I jumped out of the bed as the prophecy of Father O'Connor became fulfilled. You son of a bitch, what the hell did you do to me? Oh, please, laddie, I merely indulged in a little thrill. You Yankees are so uptight about your sexuality. You fucking raped me? God, laddie, you make it sound so derogatory. You motherfucker. Then I grabbed the piece of metal out of his hand and stabbed him with it right into his heart. I continued stabbing him with the jagged piece of metal over and over in my psychotic rage. I don't know exactly how long this went on for, but I didn't stop stabbing him until I was completely covered in his blood and he had sustained so many punctures to the face and torso that he was unrecognizable. Then I delivered the final blow to his groin region as Brutus once did many years ago to Julius Caesar, maybe for the same reasons, but who knows the truth as far as history is concerned. All I knew was that this bastard had drugged and sodomized me when I was incapacitated, and I was now covered from head to toe in his blood. I realized that I didn't know if this man was the devil or not, and I didn't have the answer as to why his business card had found its way to my front yard after a bloody massacre with a bunch of 1%ers and radicals, but not one thing was certain. He had crossed the wrong hombre, and because of that, he had sealed his own fate. As I make the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit salute, I recite this prayer over the dead corpse in front of me. Good riddance to you, Mr. Fur, you goddamn rapist pig. May your spirit be carried into the flames of eternal hellfire. Scene now changes. Outside of the airport, I noticed a homeless man holding a cardboard sign as he sat on the sidewalk with a cup in front of him, panhandling for spare change, probably to get him his next fix. As I focused my attention on him, I drifted off in my mind. How was I really any different than him? Even though I had distinguished myself in life by working for the federal government and being a tax-paying citizen, I really wasn't too much different from him. Sure, he was a bum who more than likely lacks possessions like owning a home or car and disregarding fundamental things in life like working a legitimate job or taking care of his hygiene, but regardless of our differences, we both shared a common goal. Sure, mine was a little more conventional, but I would be lying if I said I had never struggled with my own demons like it seems he currently is. I guess I was just a little more fortunate than him, and for that I felt a sense of gratefulness. Grateful because I had beat and survived addiction, and through that struggle I had managed to find a woman who loved me and married her. Sure, I had recently experienced the loss of my adopted son and even my best friend and mentor in life, and it was also true that I had been sodomized by a man who some people believed to be the devil himself. But regardless of all this misfortune I had experienced, I was grateful. Grateful to have become the person I am today, and as I was feeling grateful, I felt a bit optimistic. Optimistic because I was still alive and had made it out of the abyss of the anus complex. As I was contemplating everything I was grateful for, I heard the sound of birds chirping and noticed the rays of the sun on my face. Then I heard the sound of a car horn, and as I looked into the distance, I saw Sandy waiting for me in the driver's seat of her car. Now, if I wasn't grateful for anything else in life, I was sure as hell grateful for her, and through this gratefulness, I would learn how to eventually get rid of the shit that my life used to be covered in. Now, as cliche as this might sound, Sandy had in fact saved me, and she gave me a reason to be. So in honor of this blessing that the universe so accommodatingly rendered to this wretched soul that I would forever show my gratitude by giving Sandy every ounce of my love until death did we part. And the scene now changes. In a galaxy outside of the Milky Way, Thomas had managed to commandeer a vehicle as its owner had been distracted with a bottle of pre-made Long Island iced teas that he had illegally snuck back into his planet and had been passed out drunk. Now, not only had Thomas been homesick and missing Sandy and Charles, he just wanted to get away from these drunken degenerates that he shared half of his genetic structure with. He also began to loathe alcohol for making people so stupid as he watched the aliens around him make one bad decision after another, usually ending up with them crashing their flying saucers and being detained and placed in lockup. The only good that seemed to come out of his abduction was the fact that he had met a young extraterrestrial girl who liked him, thinking him to be smart and cute. She didn't care for all the drunken idiots either, so she decided to join Thomas on his journey back to the Earth. As they began to get closer and closer to the Milky Way, they couldn't wait to give Sandy and Charles the news that they were a serious couple, and despite their age, they were in love and were going to use this gift they had acquired to conquer all. Sadly, because they were now outside the Milky Way, it might take many more light years for their return to the Earth. The scene now changes one more time for the end of the chapter. The powers that be held a meeting to not only humor themselves with the fact that Agent Thompson had been sexually victimized by Mr. Fur, but also to present the heads of Brainsworth, Caesarson, Johnson, and Mr. Fur after some plastic surgery was done to his face, which were now cryogenically frozen with the hope that one day they would return once medical technology allowed them to. Throughout the meeting, a very small man that actually was the head of it all fancied himself to make humping gestures with a certain magical spear between his legs from time to time as a victory dance to reenact the sodomy that had transpired on that dreadful day.